Remember, remember, the 5th of November. But why? When you grow up with your country's holiday traditions, you just kind of take them for granted. Every year on the 5th of November, the British get together in places all over the country and light a big bonfire and eat some donuts and shoot off some fireworks and have a good time. And that's not something I grew up with in the US. We kind of do stuff like that more on the 4th of July, although understandably the British aren't so hot on that holiday.
You'll be back.
Since moving to Britain, I've gone to bonfires every year with family and neighbors, and we have a great time. We have a big old bonfire, and there's a very, very good fireworks display. It's the closest thing I get to 4th of July when I'm here, although I will say one key difference is that British people don't whoop and holler during the fireworks display.
Americans.
And, they just kind of politely watch it, and when it's over, they do a nice little golf clap. And then they queue in an orderly fashion to leave the venue. So to kind of scratch my patriotic itch, sometimes when the fireworks display is going on, I'll just kind of quietly go, USA, USA. The first time I went to a bonfire, I noticed this scarecrow type thing sitting up on top of the mountain of wood that was about to be incinerated for my entertainment. So I turned to my husband and I was like, hey, who's that guy up there? And he was like, that's the guy. And I was like, I know it's a guy. Why is he up there? And my husband was like, no, that's Guy. And then I rummaged around in my memory of history and went, oh, Guy Fawkes. The Gunpowder Plot happened 420 years ago. Has poor Guy had enough punishment yet? Apparently not. Every year at this time, it's common to hear little bits of the poem that goes, remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. The first time I came across the lyrics, like most Americans, was when I read V for Vendetta, a dystopian comic by Alan Moore. I could have just said a comic by Alan Moore because all of his comics are dystopian. After moving to England, I realized that everyone just knows this poem because of Bonfire Night. For years, I've been going to bonfires each 5th of November without really thinking about why any of us were there, other than to eat donuts and watch stuff go boom. But this year, I finally decided to look up the poem, read the whole thing, and find out who wrote it. And now, dear listener, please take my hand because I'm about to pull you down a rabbit hole. Here's the story of a poem that all British kids know, but don't remember learning. The Gunpowder Plot was a plan hatched in 1604 and attempted in 1605 by a bunch of English Catholics who were fed up with how badly they'd been treated by the Protestant-dominated government. Protestantism had been the official faith in England for about 70 years, but a lot of Catholics still didn't want to convert just because the government told them to. The same problem was happening in the opposite direction in lots of other places in Europe at this time. Most Catholics were loyal to king and country, but they also wanted the right to remain in the church that reported to the Pope. They saw Protestantism as a heretical breakoff from the one true faith. But punishments for failing to switch over grew harsher and harsher. The government took money and land. People were thrown in jail or even lost their lives just for wanting to remain Catholic, because those in power believed that letting people just believe whatever they wanted was too dangerous to be allowed. It's super awesome that after 400 years, nobody gets put in jail anymore because they have ideas the British government doesn't like. Almost all English Catholics remained peaceful despite intense harassment and confiscation of their goods and money. Some did flee the country, but most accepted their persecution as a test of their faith. But some turned to extremism. Several desperate dudes decided to dynamite the duly elected parliament along with the King, Queen, and Prince of Wales. They rented some rooms under the House of Lords and filled it with barrels of gunpowder. Their plan was to blow everything sky high when the royals came on the opening day of Parliament. Then they wanted to kidnap the princess who was next in line for the throne and make sure she turned Catholic.
Not a great plan.
Anyway, we'll never know what would have happened because the conspirators got busted. There were too many people involved in the plot and they started talking. One of them told his friend, who was a member of Parliament, that maybe it wouldn't be such a great idea to go on opening day. This member of Parliament was a Catholic, but he was also a loyal Englishman, so he went straight to the king. Then the king sent the Earl of Suffolk to check out the Palace of Westminster. He went down to the basement, and there was a guy in there. See what I did? With a whole lot of firewood stacked up to hide a whole lot of barrels. The Earl of Suffolk was like, "Why are you down here hanging out with a bunch of firewood?" And Guy Fawkes was like, "I'm just babysitting this firewood for my boss." And then the Earl of Suffolk was like, "How come there's a gajillion barrels under the firewood?" "'Cause who's your boss? This guy Percy who totally hates the king?" So the cops grabbed Guy Fawkes and subjected him to enhanced interrogation.
Hello. Welcome to the dungeon.
Then the cops hunted down the rest of the conspirators. Some of them died in an epic showdown that would have made Wyatt Earp proud.
We're here to disarm you. Throw up your hands.
And some of them were captured and interviewed using specialist equipment. And then they got the ending of the movie Braveheart. I am totally against political violence, but it is easy to see why these Catholic dudes got so radicalized, because 17th century Protestantism was way harsh. There were no worship bands. There were no cool guy pastors with a soul patch and a pair of Oakleys. King James was like a diehard Calvinist, which meant he was like, "All humans are disgusting, sinful worms who are so awful they aren't even worth saving, and nothing you do will ever impress God or your mum." Guy Fawkes wasn't the leader of the Gunpowder Plot. This guy, Robert Catesby, was. But I think that the poems mention Guy Fawkes and not Robert Catesby because Guy was the one who was in the room when the cops showed up and uncovered the entire plot. We also have a lot of recorded statements from Guy Fawkes because of his enhanced interrogations, as well as his testimony during his trial. We don't have any of that from Catesby because he went down in a blaze of glory in the shootout at the OK Corral. Ironically, the Catholic conspirators were wiped out in that battle because their gunpowder was too wet to go off.
I guess irony can be pretty ironic sometimes.
Most of the country was relieved that a major terrorist plot and political revolution had been foiled, so they all ran out and celebrated in the customary way with enormous bonfires and the ringing of church bells. Parliament immediately passed the Thanksgiving Act to encourage people to do this every year so everyone could feel patriotic and Protestant. Guy Fawkes has been burned in effigy ever since. In America for Thanksgiving, we eat pie. But you do you, Britain. The first poem written to celebrate Bonfire Night was by John Milton, but no kids have ever heard of it because it's in Latin and it's just a way for Milton to flex his knowledge of Greek mythology. But now we can finally ask, when was the poem Remember, Remember the 5th of November written? Nobody knows. And who wrote it? Nobody knows. The earliest printed version of the lyrics that I could find was in the 1813 edition of Brand's Popular Antiquities, which was based on an older book that was edited and amended by Sir Henry Ellis. This version of the lyric comes from Oxfordshire. "The 5th of November, since I can remember, gunpowder, treason, and plot. This is the day that God did prevent, to blow up his king and parliament. A stick and a stake, for Victoria's sake. If you won't give me one, I'll take two. The better for me, and the worse for you." There were lots of different versions of this poem chanted all over the country. It's possible that the more famous version of the lyrics existed as early as 1813 or even earlier, but I couldn't find it printed anywhere before 1864. The version most of my neighbors know was published in the Book of Days, an encyclopedia of holidays written by Robert Chambers. "Remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. There is no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot." There's a longer version of this that seems to have been printed widely in the 20th century, and here in Leicestershire, I've found that most people accept this one as the version of the gunpowder poem, even if they grew up in different parts of the country. "Remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes, 'twas his intent to blow up the king and the parliament. 70 barrels of powder below, poor old England to overthrow. By God's providence he was catched, with the dark lantern and burning match. Holla boys, let the bells ring. Holla boys, God save the king." That's the version of the poem that seems to have settled in as the official one, but I also found one that was even more expanded that really leans into the anti-Catholic stuff. Like, there's mention of a rope for the Pope, and it's not so he can enjoy some great lasso tricks. I think the reason this version has been shelved is that in this day and age, Britain has done its best to move past the vicious battles that used to go on between Protestants and Catholics. Nobody thinks about the religious aspects of Bonfire Night anymore. In fact, I've gone to Bonfire Night a couple of times with some pretty devout Catholics. Whenever I've heard the history of the holiday mentioned, it's always described more as a political thing, celebrating the rule of law over the desires of political revolutionaries. But mostly it's just a bit of fun. Bonfire Night happens just as the year is turning dark and cold. The celebration I go to has food trucks and fairground rides and carnival games. They stack a bunch of old wooden pallets about 3 stories tall, and the fire it makes is truly impressive. I get a kick out of that because quite a lot of the time in Britain you can't have any fun because of health and safety regulations, but this is one of the few times when you're allowed to build an irresponsibly large pile of wood and pig out on donuts while you watch it all burn. I had a lot of fun researching the origins of this poem, and I found so many variations, like this one that has kind of a sing-song playground feel to it. Guy, 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 poke him in the eye, put him on the bonfire and there let him die. That one sounds like something kids would chant on the playground at school while playing jump rope, and then they'd get told off by a teacher for shouting about poking people in the eye. I'm not disappointed at all that Remember, Remember the 5th of November doesn't have a clear origin or author. That's just how folklore works. We will never know what genius first came up with the lyrics, Jingle bells, Batman smells, and we'll never know who first said, Remember, Remember the 5th of November. There are so many little scraps of poetry that children just know, even if they can't remember when or where they were learned. Culture evolves and changes over time, and I'm glad to say that despite the violent roots of Bonfire Night, today it's turned into something everyone can enjoy. And the only remaining religious debate is whether to get chocolate or caramel sauce drizzled on the donuts.